Okay, welcome to this segment of our Daniel class. Last week, we did segment 14, which was part 2 of Daniel chapter 9, where we looked at the 70 Shabuas, the 70 years. Tonight, I am actually calling this 14B supplemental session, because we're going to focus on just 2 verses here in the end of Daniel chapter 9. Actually, it's really a verse and a half, and look at what Daniel shows as the final week, the final Shabua. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this segment out on YouTube. I will put it up for a couple weeks for everybody that watches. I may take it down. I don't know. I may leave it up. I haven't decided yet, but and the reason is because tonight is all eschatology. In other words, it's all a study of the end times. Where last week we looked a lot of historical history of what happened until the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Tonight, everything that we are going to look at tonight has not yet happened. So it's all eschatology. It is all the future. And some of what this is what I am going to give you my understanding. There are a lot of people who have talked about this section of Daniel, and I'm just going to give you my understanding of this, of what I think is going to happen in the final 7 years of this world. I could tell you a few things. It is going to be about Jerusalem. I believe Jerusalem is going to be central to what happens at the end of the age. I think the temple is going to be central. And I think that by the time we get done tonight, you will see, as I do, that if what I believe that this is talking about, I think it could happen definitely in our lifetime. I think we are heading towards the end. And so strap on, here we go. Daniel chapter, oh, and by the way, there are no notes on this. This is not in your syllabus. So here we go with Daniel chapter 9, part 3, the final week, the last 7 years. And these are the verses that we will be looking at tonight. Daniel 24 through 26a is what we looked at last week. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people in your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in the times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. That's where we ended last week. And then this is the rest of Daniel chapter 9 that we are going to look at tonight. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Those are the verses we are going to look at tonight. And here in verse 26, it says, then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. The way this is written, as you read it here in Daniel, it sounds like the Messiah will be cut off, which I believe, as we looked at last week, is the crucifixion, where the Messiah is killed, the Messiah is cut off and have nothing. And then we're at the end. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city, the sanctuary. Its end will come with a flood, and to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. Now, there was a destruction of the city and the sanctuary. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Jerusalem was really defeated in 135 in the Bar Kokhba revolt. Some have thought that's what this is talking about. But this goes to the very end of the age as we continue on here. So the way it's written, it sounds like it would come right after the Messiah is cut off. Yet it's almost been 2,000 years since Jesus died on the cross. And this last week that we're going to look at in verse 27 has not yet taken place. In this little comma, I think, is the time we are living now. We've been living since Christ came the first time. I think it's all part of the mystery. And I put this verse because we talked about the mystery last week, but 1 Corinthians 2:7-8 says, we speak the God's wisdom in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God predestined before the ages to our glory, the wisdom which none of the rulers of the ages has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The Messiah's first coming, all that understanding we looked at last week in the book of Daniel was hidden. It wasn't understood. He gave the information about the Messiah being cut off, even gave the time it was going to happen, and yet it was not understood. The princes of this world did not understand. I think what's going to happen in the future is still part of the mystery of God. In fact, if you, in Revelation chapter 10, I believe it says, when the seventh angel sounds, or when that last trump sounds, it says, the mystery of God will be finished. So this, what we're looking at tonight, is part of the mystery of God. So it's really anybody's guess what's going to happen, but I will show you what I think is a very plausible explanation of these things. So here are these two verses. Now, nobody asked me about how to set up the verses when the verses got set up. I think what we looked at last week should have ended verse 26. I think this should start verse 27. And then what is verse 27 should be verse 28. But nobody asked me when they set up the verses. So, because really it's a new thought here. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he, this prince who is to come, will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Now, to review what we looked at last time, the 70 Shabuas. I believe that in 453 BC is when Ezra made a decree to put the word out to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. And that was 62 Shabuas, 62 sets of 7 years, or 434 years. That temple was there until 19 BC. In 19 BC, Herod built the second temple during this second temple period. And 7 Shabuas later, or 49 years later, in 31 AD, Jesus was crucified. At that point, the purpose of the temple was no more. The veil was rent in twain. from top to bottom. The new covenant came in, and as in Hebrew, there's no more need for sacrifice for sin, and that ended the old covenant. A new covenant began. This is the time of the mystery. And these are the 62 weeks, and the 7 weeks are the 483 years from the time of the decree until the Messiah was cut off. Now we are in this time of the mystery. There's still yet, that's only 69 weeks. We're missing a week in the prophecy to Daniel about what was going to happen for his holy city and for the people. There's one more week for Jerusalem. There's one more week to come. And this week remains this one more Shabuah, one more set of 7 years, the final 7 years. In the book of Revelation, after the 6th trump sounds, when you get to Revelation 11, and we'll look at this tonight, there's actually a 7-year period that's talked about in Revelation 11. At the end of that 7 years, the 7th angel sounds the 7th trump. And I believe that is the last trump. After the 7 years, the last trump sounds. The 7th angel sounds at the end of the 490 years. The Messiah, the deliverer, comes to Zion for the nations of Israel, for the church also, and the mystery of God is finished. I think that's what's going to happen. Now, what are the details? Here we go. First of all, let me point out, I believe that what's written here in the end of verse 26, which I think should be verse 27, but what's written here in the end of verse 26 is about the final desolation. This is the end. It's given you the desolation. And then I think what is verse 27 is actually how and why that desolation comes about. So it first tells us about the end desolation that's going to occur, and then it tells us about the last 7 years that lead up to the desolation. But this part of the verse talks about this desolation to come. And it says, the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. It will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Jerusalem is the city. Jerusalem is the city that's talked about in this answer from Gabriel. Gabriel said, there are 70 Shabuahs for your city. In fact, the whole prayer of chapter 9 is Daniel praying about Jerusalem and the restoration of Jerusalem. In Daniel 9:2, it says, for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem. In verse 12, he says, what was done to Jerusalem? In verse 16, it is your city, Jerusalem. In verse 18, it's our desolations and the city, which is called by your name. Verse 24, in that answer from Gabriel, it's that 70 Shabuahs are decreed for your people and your holy city. The 70 weeks is about Jerusalem. It's about the holy city of Jerusalem. And then in verse 29, it was to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's the context of Daniel 9. And that is why I had mentioned earlier with the 10 nations that come to agreement, whatever's involved in that final 10 nation, Jerusalem is going to be central to it. The future of Jerusalem and the Jewish people is going to be some part of what happens, I think has to be part of this 10 nation kingdom and the agreement that's made in this final kingdom of the world. Somehow they are going to be over Jerusalem at the end of the age. So Jerusalem is in part of this prophecy. The other thing is the sanctuary. It will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The sanctuary is the temple. It's actually the holy place. There's the holy place in the temple, which included the golden incense, the table of showbread, and the golden candlestick with the candles, the golden candlestick. That is the holy place. That could be considered the sanctuary. And then the Holy of Holies, which is beyond the veil, the Holy of Holies is the inner sanctuary. It is the holiest of all. It is the most holy place, right? That inner sanctuary of the temple is the sanctuary of the temple. And it says here that the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed. So in order for that to happen, in order for this to be a literal event that is going to happen, the Jews, first of all, needed to move back to Jerusalem. In 1948, Israel became a Jewish nation again. In order for this prophecy to be literal, another temple will need to be built before the end of this age. Could it happen in our lifetime? We'll look at that in a bit. Scriptures regarding this last 7 years, other scriptures indicate there is going to be another temple built in Jerusalem before the end of the age. In Matthew 24, Jesus said in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. The holy place is most likely that sanctuary, that Holy of Holies, that this one will be standing, and that will be part of this abomination of desolation. In Luke 21, now I've heard many say that Luke 21 could be referring to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and also the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD. I think that definitely could be true. I also think it can be talking about what's going to happen here in these last 7 years. In Luke 21, 20 through 21, he says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And then you have 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, which discusses this man of destruction, this man of lawlessness. 2 Corinthians 2:3 says, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come. And this is talking about the day of the Lord. He said about the coming of the day of the Lord. It will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Oh, I think I highlighted some of these. They're standing in the holy place. Here you'll see in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot of the Gentiles. And here, this son of destruction will take his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. And then in Revelation chapter 11, it says, there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So if these verses about the end of the age, if they are literal, the temple has to be rebuilt. There has to be another temple. And actually, if what we looked at last time about the 62 Shabuas is correct, that was this temple that existed from the time of Ezra until Herod's temple. And then the 7 Shabuas, it was Herod's temple that existed from 19 BC until Jesus was crucified. It makes sense that the final Shabua is about one more temple, a third temple that is going to be built in Jerusalem at the end of the end of the end of this age, the last Shabua, the final week. I know there are some who have said that these usages of the temple of God could be metaphoric. Others I've heard said that these uses of the temple of God could be how the church today, we are the temple of God, and that this one will actually be out of the Christian church, and this is a totally Christian ideal of we, the church, being the temple that is defiled, and I suppose that could be, but I think it could actually be what it says, that there is going to be another temple in Jerusalem at the end of the age, in the last final 7 years before Jesus Christ comes back. So I think there's going to be another temple in Jerusalem. So that's the first thing on this. The next thing on this verse says, the end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. I believe this end will come with a flood. I've given you verses here that many times a flood metaphorically describes an overflowing military force. And I've given you verses that's used that way in Isaiah 8:7, Daniel 11:10, Jeremiah 46:7-8. And in these verses, it describes an army. It describes a military that they overwhelm the city like a flood. It's like a flood that comes in. And I think that what augments this end with the flood is, even to the end, there will be war. That there will be these, and we know from Revelation, there's going to be this battle of Armageddon that comes at the end of the age. It'll be the war that ends all wars. So I think this flood is talking about this final desolation that comes through military force at the end of the age. It then says desolations are determined. When we say the phrase, the abomination of desolation, I think maybe a more accurate term is that it's an abomination that brings about the desolation. Whatever this prince does, whatever this little horn does, this beast, it is going to be an abomination in the temple that is going to bring the final desolation on the earth. Now, it seems to me with those verses in Thessalonians, in Matthew, and then here in Daniel, that Jerusalem and the temple is what is being talked about. This is where the desolation is going to occur. When you come to the book of Revelation, there is no recorded desolation of Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. It does not reveal the destruction or desolation of Jerusalem. What it does describe in Revelation 17 and 18 in great description is a destruction and desolation of Babylon. If you go back, if you remember when we did session 2 in this class, we looked at Revelation, and I asked the question, what is Babylon? And I gave you different ideas. Some think that Babylon is actually the Babylon of that is now in Iraq, that city is actually rebuilt, that there is a new Babylon that rises up out of that region of the world, out of Iraq, and that Babylon is built up again. Another idea was that the United States is Babylon, that we're the Babylon of the future. Another idea, it was that Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, is Babylon, is the Babylon of Revelation. I would like to put before you tonight that could the future Babylon in the book of Revelation be a symbolic name for Jerusalem? When you do this stuff just, it so fits together. I know when Vince recently did his Revelation class, I think he talked a little bit about this because we had discussed this, but he didn't, I don't think, give you the details I'm going to give you now about why there is a possibility that the destruction and desolation of what is called Babylon in Revelation could actually be Jerusalem. And I'd like to give you these things for your consideration to chew on, to think about. Consider the following. In Revelation, there's a city called Babylon. It's called the Great City. And in Revelation 17 and 18, this is destroyed. The battle, the nations flow and they destroy this city. It's called the Great City. It's called Babylon. It's not called Jerusalem. Yet here in Daniel 9, the city in the context that is destroyed, where the final desolation is brought, is Jerusalem. Consider this. And you can check this out for yourself. In the book of Revelation, the city of Jerusalem is never called Jerusalem. The only references to the name Jerusalem in the book of Revelation are in connection with the New Jerusalem that comes down after the millennial kingdom, that comes down from heaven in Revelation 21. That's the only uses of the name Jerusalem in Revelation. The city is mentioned in Revelation, but what does God call it in Revelation 11 and 8? In Revelation 11 is about the temple, and then these two prophets speak, and then they are killed after 3.5 years. And it says in verse 8, their dead bodies will lie in the streets of the great city. So Jerusalem is called the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So that is the description of Jerusalem here at the end of the age in Revelation chapter 11. In Revelation 17:9, the woman, the harlot called Babylon, sits on 7 mountains. There's a few cities that could be that. Rome would be a city that could say it sits on 7 mountains. But Jerusalem is a city that sits on 7 mountains. In Genesis, they're called the mountains of Moriah. And Jerusalem could be termed a city on 7 mountains. I don't know about Babylon, where it is there in Iraq in the desert. I'm not sure if that location, I just don't know enough about the geography, the topology of where Babylon, I always pictured it as being in a desert land, but I really don't know. So I don't know if that location of the original Babylon can be considered a city sitting on 7 mountains. Jerusalem can definitely be a city that it sits on 7 mountains. In Revelation, it says about Babylon that in Babylon is found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and that God avenged the blood of his bondservants on her. And this is in Revelation 18:24 and 19:2. And it says, in her, in Babylon, was found the blood of prophets and of the saints and of all who have been on the earth. For he has judged the great harlot who is corrupting the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged the blood of his bond servants on her. Jesus spoke about Jerusalem in these terms. Remember in Matthew 23:37a, Jesus said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How many prophets have been killed in Jerusalem? How many saints? I know Stephen in the book of Acts was stoned in Jerusalem. How many of the servants of God have been killed in Jerusalem? I don't know of any prophets that were slain in Babylon, but I do know that prophets and saints were stoned and slain in Jerusalem. Now, I want to show you this in Isaiah. I had studied Isaiah, and Isaiah chapter 1 has always been a little intriguing to me. If you ever study Isaiah, Isaiah really starts with his ministry in chapter 6. In chapter 6, he talks about that at the time that Uzziah, the king Uzziah, dies, is when Isaiah starts his ministry. Now, at the start of that, Jerusalem under Uzziah was not this abominable city. But during the time that Isaiah prophesied later on, Ahaz was king, and he actually brought an abomination into Jerusalem, which was terrible. And after that, then really what is recorded in Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah could be referring to. And then Hezekiah, his son, restored the temple, restored true worship in the temple. And then Isaiah's son Manasseh ruled. Now under Manasseh, it became an abominable temple again. And he, brought in, it made it worse than the Gentile nations, it says. There's many, I think, who believe that Manasseh had Isaiah killed. I don't know if that's true, but I think that's a traditional belief. So it seems like when you get to Isaiah chapter 1, it could be at the end of his life, and he's referring back to how Jerusalem is. I'd like to put another thought to you, which I didn't really think about until I started looking at these things, that possibly the first chapter of Isaiah is a vision about Jerusalem at the end of the age. And look how this fits with what we read in Revelation about Jerusalem and about Babylon. Isaiah 1, and this is verse 1, 10, 21, and 24. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. This is his vision. He's looking towards the future. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the instruction of your God, you people of Gomorrah. How the faithful city has become a harlot. She who was full of justice, righteousness once lodged in her, and now murderers. The mighty one of Israel declares, I will be relieved of my adversaries and avenge myself of my foes. And then finally, in the book of Revelation, Babylon the Great, it says, made all nations drink of the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. In Revelation 14:8, it says, a second angel followed, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. All right? That she made that this was the wine of this passion which brings about God's wrath. Jeremiah actually prophesied this. In Jeremiah chapter 25, we looked at Jeremiah 25, and 25, he prophesies about the 70 years of desolation. But after he gets done prophesying about that, Jeremiah goes on to prophesy about the wrath of God. And this is what he says about this wine of God's wrath and the intoxication that is going to go and spread out throughout the world. And in Jeremiah 25, 15, 18, for thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, says to me, take this cup of the wine of wrath from my hand and cause all nations to whom I send you to drink it. They will drink and stagger and go mad because of the sword that I will send among them. Then I took the cup from the Lord's hand and made all nations drink to whom the Lord sent me, Jerusalem and the city of Judah and its kings and its princes, to make them a ruin, a horror, a hissing, a curse, as it is this day. This wine of God's wrath starts from Jerusalem and goes out from there. Just an interesting tidbit about the wine of God's wrath. So it's an interesting thought. And if you take time to look at that, and if you read Revelation with the thought and idea that this could be talking about Jerusalem, this great city at the end of the age, it's pretty interesting how these things fit together. Now, back to here in Daniel 9, I want you to point out, it's not that the prince who is to come will destroy the city. It says the people of the prince to come is to destroy the city. This word people can mean the nation. It could mean a member of one's people, compatriots, countrymen. If what I think could happen, it seems that in the beginning, this is this wonderful thing that the Orthodox Judaism and secular Judaism and all the nations of the world celebrate this coming together of what's going to happen in Jerusalem for the Jewish people, for a new temple, a new sanctuary, and everybody's kumbaya, right? It's a kumbaya, everybody's happy and blessed. But when this abomination happens, I cannot imagine the Orthodox Jews being at all happy about this. If this is going to happen the way it looks like it's going to happen, I think the Orthodox Jews could very well be the ones that are going to destroy the city and the sanctuary because of the evil. That's one thought. The other thought is that when we looked at the 10 kings, there's going to be 10 kings in this final world kingdom. Look what it says about these 10 kings in Revelation 17. Revelation 17, 16 through 17 says, and then the 10 horns. These are the 10 kings, this final kingdom, which you saw in the beast. These 10 kings will hate the harlot. This is Babylon. They're going to hate the harlot, and they will make her desolate and naked and eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire, for God has put in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the word of God will be fulfilled. If these are what I think could be an agreement among Arab nations, I could see them turning on the beast, and upon, if it's Jerusalem, it would be very clear that they would hate the harlot and what has become of this. So like I say, I think this part of Daniel 26 comes at the end. How do we get to that final time of desolation? The last Shabuah, the final week. And that's Revelation, that's Daniel 9:27. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, one more Shabuah. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. 1 week, one more Shabuah, the final 7 years, completing the 490 or 70 weeks. There's one more week on this earth that will take place at the end of the age. Now, these are just verses. If you want to take a picture of this with your cell phone, this is just interesting if you want to study this in scripture. These are different uses in scripture about 7 years. And I think they all have kind of a significance about the final 7 years. Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and then another 7 years because he got Leah. There were 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine at the time when of Joseph in Egypt. There's 7 years to a Sabbath year of rest. Revelation 25, Leviticus 25. 70 times 7 years is a year of Jubilee. Leviticus 25, 8 through 12. David reigned in Hebron 7 years before taking Jerusalem. That's kind of significant. There were 7 years for the completion of Solomon's temple. That's significant. 7 years for the completion of the temple. This is an interesting one. In 7 years, the Shunammite woman leaves for 7 years. This is during the time of Elisha, during the famine, and then returns, and her land is restored back to her household after 7 years. That's 2 Kings 8, 1 through 6. And then we saw in Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar went into madness for 7 years. So how does this 7 years break down? He will make a firm covenant for 1 week, 1 Shabuah. He, the prince who is to come, will make a firm covenant, a covenant. The word covenant can also be understood as a promise, a solemn promise. It can be an agreement. It can be a treaty. Something will happen here at the end of the age where this little horn will rise up, and I believe it's going to be among these 10 nations, and maybe it's something the whole world celebrates. It's going to be, I believe, come out of the 10 nations, but I think the whole world will be involved with this. There's going to be this covenant, this treaty that is made. And I believe it's a treaty that will be including the Jewish people so that they can have worship in the temple again. But there's going to be some covenant, some agreement that's made here at the end. And he's going to have this covenant, this agreement for 7 years. And then it says, in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice. In the middle of that 7 Shabuahs, or after 3.5 years, he's going to put a stop to sacrifice. In order for him to put a stop to sacrifice, that means by the time you get to 3.5 years into this final 7 years, the temple is active. They are again sacrificing. There is an active presence of the Jewish people worshiping in the temple again in Jerusalem. But something's going to happen here. And something that's going to happen that is going to be abominable in the sanctuary when he puts a stop to sacrifice. So there is a time of 7 years described here in Daniel 7 in the book of Revelation here. And in the book of Revelation, this 7 years is actually there. And these 2 3.5 year periods are revealed. And this is in Revelation 11. In Revelation 11, 1 through 4, here's a description of these I believe the final 7 years. He said, there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations and will tread underfoot for the holy city for 42 months. This is the first 3.5 years. There is this temple, and the nations are involved with it. I think it's going to be celebrated. I think from what we get from the other sections about this little horn, this 3.5 years is probably going to be a very prosperous year for the Middle East, especially, but probably for all the nations of the world. I get the idea this is going to be a extremely prosperous time, one of the greatest times of the world, where covetousness is going to rule the day. Money is going to be the undergirding, I believe, going to be the undergirding hook that is going to make this agreement. And people, I think for the Jewish people, it's their ability to worship at Jerusalem is going to be why they will sign on to this agreement. And it'll be great. 3.5 years, 42 months has this time. And then the abomination of desolation is set up. And then he will grant authority to his 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, the second 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And we know at the end of that 3.5 years, the beast rises up and kills them. And then the 7th trumpet sounds. That's what happens in Daniel, in Revelation chapter 11. This most likely is going to be a time of peace. It's going to seem like a time of peace. I think the world will celebrate this agreement, this covenant that has been sanctioned and really instigated by this little horn. And that's mostly this likely, this 442 months spoken of here in Revelation 11. Now, I want to point out this, that it says that he was given a measuring rod, And I'm going to do this really quickly. There are 2 other sections of scripture and prophecy where a measuring device is given. And in both places, the context is the construction of a temple. Ezekiel 40 is the time of Ezekiel chapter 40. And by the way, we looked at earlier, I believe that Ezekiel gets this prophecy about the rebuilding of a new temple right at the beginning of the 7 years of Nebuchadnezzar going into his chapter 4. I think it works out that is when Ezekiel gets this prophecy, and he is shown a man with a measuring rod in his hand. The other place is in Zechariah. Zechariah was one of the 2 prophets, he and Haggai, who prophesied during the reconstruction of the temple. The context of Zechariah is building a temple. And he says, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, there was a man with a measuring line in his hand. And I said, where are you going? He said, to measure Jerusalem, to see how wide it is and how long it is. In the context of Zechariah is this building of the temple. And Haggai was the one that first started prophecy. There are 2 prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. They begin prophesying in the 2nd year of Darius. This is in Ezra 5:1. In the 2nd year of Darius, Haggai begins to prophesy. In the 1st of the 6th month, he continues until the 21st day of the 7th month, which, by the way, is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. 3.5 years, significant? I think so. 3.5 years later, 42 months later, in the 6th year of Darius, in the month of Adar, that temple was built. And that's in Ezra 6:14 through 15. That through, it says, the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of the prophet Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, and they finished building according to the command of God. This temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month Adar in the 6th year of the reign King Darius, and it works out to 42 months, 3.5 years they constructed. So I asked myself the question, what does it mean when God gives a revelation with a measuring device? You know what I picture in my mind? I picture a tape measure. What do you associate with that is building, construction. I think there's a possibility that this agreement, this covenant, this treaty triggers the Jews to build the temple again. And that might be part of what happens during the first 3.5 years. They get a temple and they start worshiping again on Jerusalem. Now, I have no idea what will happen with this temple. I don't know how this happens. I wouldn't be surprised if this is some universal agreement where we don't even have to tear down the Dome of the Rock. Maybe they come to an agreement to build a temple next to the Dome of the Rock. So you got a Jewish temple and a Muslim mosque, and everybody's, we're all one. It's one world. There's peace on the earth, all religions, everybody's happy. Yay, 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 whatever. It could be like that, where the Jews are happy because they have a temple again. The world's happy because we've got unity and we've got everybody's together. But it's not going to be good. There is a hook underneath it that's evil. I think it could very well that during this 3.5 years, is the fulfillment of what's written here in 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 4. Now, as the times and epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that day would overtake you like a thief. The whole world will be talking about how wonderful this is, how great it is. There's prosperity, there's peace, there's safety, no more war. And then, boom, there's war. And then we get the abomination of desolation is set up after 3.5 years. And then you have these verses in Daniel 7:25. It says that this beast, he will intend to make alterations. They'll be given to his hand for a time, times and a half a time. In Daniel 12:7, it says that he will finish shattering the power of the holy people. It would be for a time, times and a half a time, shattering the holy people. That's us. And that also includes the Christian, those of us who stand up against this at this time. Jesus said that there will be a tribulation like has never been since the world until that time. And the beast and what's happening there will hate Orthodox Jews. They will hate Christians who stand against what's going on in Jerusalem. In Daniel 12:11, it says, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. In Revelation 13:5 is this time where it says about this beast that they'll be given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and authority to act for 42 months. This beast has 42 months, 3.5 years. And in Revelation 11, 3 through 4, it says he will grant authority to his 2 witnesses and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. So what's the difference between the 1,290 days from the time of the abomination of desolation set up and the 1,260 days of the prophet speaking? Here's what I think it means. The abomination of desolation is set up. 30 days later, those prophets begin to speak. And they speak for 1,260 days. And that's why you got 1,290 days. 30 days later, these prophets start to speak. And those are the final 3.5 years on the earth. So, putting it all together. Okay. And this chart actually here is it's not in your notes. I don't think it's in your notes, but it is I sent another thing called maps and charts, and it's in there. What's going to happen in the end of the age is this 10 kingdom nation will come together. Somehow, some way, there's going to be this kingdom where these 10 nations and there will be a covenant that is made. And this, I believe, will begin the first 3.5 years. I think it's possible that if the temple isn't already built by then, this will trigger the construction of this temple so that the Jews can begin worshiping again. And it's going to seem a time of prosperity, a time of peace, but it's really going to be a time of deception and evil that'll draw many people away from the truth. And then after 3.5 years, the abomination of desolation is set up. And I believe this is in the Holy of Holies. I believe it's where the beast himself probably will make an image of himself. As it says in Thessalonians, he will sit in the temple of God as being God. And this will be the final abomination of desolation in the temple. And then there is the last 3.5 years. Jesus said this is going to be a great time of great tribulation. It'll be for a time, a times, a half a time. And it is this 3.5 year period. That is the final Shabuah. And after that 3.5 years, the 7th trump sounds. And this age is over with. So I put for you one last thing. And that is, John, are you serious? Do you really think that the temple could be built in our lifetime? Could this actually happen in our day and time? So I leave you with the Temple Institute. Have you ever heard of this? I hadn't heard about this until I went to visit a Bible Lands tour. Bill and Marianne were on this in 2006. And we are, we were in Jerusalem as after the whole thing. It's the end of the whole time. We've been there already 10 days or 4, it was a long, and I'm so tired of hearing everything. I'm like zoning out. I'm like, and we're just going from one thing talking about, and I'm kind of zoning out. I'm not really listening anymore. I'm done. I'm ready to go shopping, do my final shopping in Jerusalem. And the guide, we're going through this like a museum. I don't even know where I'm at. I'm just following along the crowd. And suddenly he shows this big golden candlestick. And the guide says, this candlestick, and this is in the old city of Jerusalem, by the way. Here's the old city. The old city of Jerusalem is divided up into 4 quarters. You got the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter. We're visiting at this time the Jewish quarter. And we're going through some little museum. I don't even know where I am. And he's taking us through. And then he shows us this. And this is my picture I took in 2006. This is the golden menorah. And he says, and this kind of woke me up, he says, this is made after the description to Moses, to Moshe, they say. And this golden is ready now to be put into the temple. And we're just waiting for the time to rebuild. All the elements of the temple have been built. And here is the golden candlestick to be put into the temple. And I went, I was like, what? Are you serious? Suddenly my kind of zoning out kind of locked in to what he was saying. And there it is standing in front of me, a new golden candlestick to be put into a future temple. I visited in 2018, and now this golden candlestick is still in the old city quarter of Jerusalem, but now they've moved it outside. It's more in your face. Here is the golden candlestick. It is now in the Jewish quarter, and this is the golden menorah, the golden candlestick that is ready to be put into a new temple in Jerusalem. I don't think in 2006 these guys had a website yet, but now the Temple Institute has a website. If you want to look to see at the plans that the Jewish people have for rebuilding the temple, this is the organization that is putting. They even have a video of choir practice. They are practicing the songs of David. They got a choir that they are practicing songs so they can worship in the temple again. They're ready to go. All the elements are built. Here is from the Temple Institute what this organization is. The sacred vessels and vestments, their purpose, their nature, the specimens, dimensions, and materials from which they are to be made were all related to Moshe by God at Mount Sinai. The construction of the vessels and the priestly garments was overseen by Bezalel, a master craftsman chosen by God to fulfill his task. The Temple Institute has likewise called upon Israel's finest craftsmen and artisans and enlisted them in the historical task of recreating the sacred vessels and vestments. Every vessel produced by the Temple Institute is done in accordance with the precise instructions that were handed down from God to Moshe. The vessels you are about to view are all fit and ready for use in the holy third temple. May it be built speedily and in our days. They are ready to go. It's not like, okay, are we ready to build the temple? But what about the elements? We already got it. Everything is ready to go. They are ready for this time to have a new temple. So there's the golden menorah. some of the other vessels. The priests of the high, they got the high priest garments already made. So there's already made. They got the ephod. The ephod's already made, already to put on the high priest when they're ready to roll. They've got this, the golden crown. You see, I don't know if you can see there the name Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the Hebrew letters. This is already made, the golden crown to put on the high priest to go on his head when they can restore and they can have worship again in the temple. The golden table of showbread, already built to be put into the holy place. The golden table of showbread is already built. The golden altar of incense, already built, ready to go into the holy place in the temple. The copper laver, this is where they do the washing, already built. There's all sorts of elements. These are all on this web. They're all there. They've got everything built already, ready to go. And the Ark of the Covenant. They have built a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. Of course, I don't know if you can read this, but what they believe is going to happen is they say that this is, unlike the other sacred vessels created by the Temple Institute for the Third Holy Temple, the Ark of the Covenant is a replica. And they believe that the original Ark created in the desert lies hidden beneath the Temple Mount and will be revealed with the building of a holy temple. I don't know about that, but I do wonder if this is part of the deception of this beast, of this miraculous thing that is going to promote this one at the end of the age. He's going to bring forth the Ark of the Covenant. I could see that happening. And that this perpetuates this amazing time in Israel where the Ark of the Covenant is built. But until then, they got a replica made in case things don't work out, I guess. So these are all built. This is already built. And one other thing I want to point out here that I still don't understand this, but it says that on the wing of abominations is going to come the one who makes desolate. What does that mean? The wing of abominations. I'm really scratching my head going, I'm still not sure what it means. But here are the different ways other versions translate this. King James says the overspreading of abominations. The International Standard Version says the uttermost edge of the sanctuary. The New Christian Bible says on the temple wing will be a terrible abomination. The Christian Standard Bible says, and the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple. The Common Jewish Bible says, on the wing of detestable things, the desolator will come. And in the Revised English Version says, and on the wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination. Now, I don't think, I thought, what is that? Is that like the West Wing? Like, we have the White House and we have the West Wing. If you look at the Bible, wing is not used that way in the Bible. The wing, especially related to the temple, is a very specific part of these elements of the temple. And that is the wing of the cherubim at the Holy of Holies over the Ark of the Covenant. The wing of the cherubim. Now look what this says. This is kind of wild. The sages of Israel teach that when Israel was according to God's will, the two cherubim faced one another and embraced. When Israel were not performing God's will, the two cherubim turned their faces away from one another. Wouldn't that be something? If during the end of the age, this one who sits in the temple as God, being God, that these winged cherubims change. And on the wing of abomination, the desolations come. Again, I'm not sure what that means, but this is the only thing I know of that was winged in the temple. And that would make sense. That's where the abomination takes place, in the Holy of Holies, in the temple of God. So that's just a little bit to chew on. I also think in our day and time, the things it says in Revelation 13 about the beast, and that the beast, it looks like he's gonna die and come back to life, and then The image of the beast, it says, is going to be come to life, and he's going to talk. I mean, you look at now with artificial intelligence. I mean, we don't even know where the beast will be. He could be like speaking, but it could all be done through AI, and it's just so weird. But everything is there in place now that this could happen in our lifetime. This could happen anytime, and it could turn like that in the world. So there's a little bit to think about what I think is going to happen in the last 7 years. So here are readings for review for you to look at. If you want to take a picture of this slide. So that is Daniel 9, 26b and 27. And these are all the verses and the different sections that we looked at here. The final week, the final Shabuah, and what could be. Again, I say this is eschatology. This is the future, but this could happen anytime. This could happen in our lifetime, and all the makings of the world are coming to us. Whether it happens in our lifetime or not, this end is coming. This train is rolling. It's coming towards this final week, this final Shabuah of mankind, and it is going to happen. So that is Daniel 14b supplemental.